Indiana Corn Growers Association and Indiana Soybean Alliance present Indiana Ag Policy with your host, Eric Pfeiffer.
Welcome to the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast. I'm Eric Pfeiffer from Hoosier Ag Today, coming to you today from the Indiana State House. It's the Bacon Bar and Brunch from the Indiana Corn Growers Association and the Indiana Soybean Alliance. And I'm here with Sarah Simpson. And Sarah, a new role for you here, your first Bacon Bar and Brunch with the Indiana Corn Growers Association and Indiana Soybean Alliance. I used to chat with Steve Howell at this event, and I used to just call him the policy guy. Can I just call you the policy gal? I don't do titles very well.
Absolutely. Yes. So I started with the Indiana Soybean Alliance and the Corn Growers Association in mid-September, and it's been a great experience getting to work with our corn and soybean farmers on state and federal policy issues.
So we're here at the Bacon Bar and Brunch. Obviously, it speaks for itself. We've got bacon here.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I went around and I tried all of the bacon. I had to. I just had to see what it was all about.
It is really, really good bacon.
The candied bacon, if you're wondering, it's probably the best. Obviously, I mean, you candy anything up, it's good.
So it is, and I'm so appreciative to Indiana Packers and to our Indiana Pork and all of the other livestock organizations that are supporting us and are here today. We have an incredible partnership with all of our livestock associations and working together with them on state and federal legislative priorities.
So while we're here at the Bacon Bar and Brunch at the State House, really the purpose of all of this is to try to get some of these legislators over here to talk about some of those priorities, right?
Yes, it is. And just yesterday, we had an opportunity to our board members were here. We had our member one-on-one visits with legislators, and we really love having this event as well to continue to talk to more legislators and get to talk to them about some of our key priorities for this session.
And I know that this session, it might seem a little light. It's not necessarily a budget session.
Right.
A lot of different things are happening, though. What are some of those messages that farmers are conveying right now to legislators?
So our farmers, the Soybean Alliance board members, and our membership and policy committee have a bill in the Senate and the House to create fallback legislation where if the federal soybean checkoff were to cease collecting, that we would have a state checkoff in place. And this is something we also work with Indiana pork producers on, and this will align us with all of the other large soybean producing states that have this in place. So certainly it may never even take effect, but it just made sense for us to be on par with the other large soybean producing states.
And this is something that it's not going to raise your checkoff. That's not happening. We're going to dig a bit deeper into this a little bit later on the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us here. I'm going to let you go and enjoy some more bacon and chat with some of these legislators. Welcome to the new role and welcome to the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast. We look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to have some farmers here on the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast coming up after this break.
There is strength in numbers. That's why the Indiana Soybean Alliance membership and policy and Indiana Corn Growers Association need you. These organizations represent Indiana soybean and corn farmers on critical and regulatory issues affecting their industry. Along with support from the national organizations, National Corn Growers Association and American Soybean Association, the Indiana members help determine public policy positions on critical issues, including farm bills, trade policy, and ethanol and biodiesel legislation. Become a member of Indiana Soybean Alliance membership, Indiana Corn Growers Association, or both. Visit incornandsoy.org to select a membership. That's incornandsoy.org.
Welcome back to the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast. Eric Pfeiffer here at the State House. It's the Bacon Bar and Brunch, the Indiana Corn Growers Association, and the Indiana Soybean Alliance. I'm with David Harden. David, you're a corn farmer, soybean farmer, pig farmer, we've got this legislation out there, SB 55. I was just talking with Sarah Simpson about it, and we were talking about this fallback for the checkoff. And I guess we just kind of want to pound home the point. We're not raising any checkoff fees. This is something that maybe some folks have been confused about. That's just not what's happening here, right?
That's right, Eric. We kind of look at Senate Bill 55 as simply an insurance policy. This bill would only come into force or come into play in the state of Indiana if the federal checkoff went away, whether that be through court action or congressional action. So we just want to make sure that we have a continuity plan in case that happens, and that we're allowed to be able to continue the great work that we're doing with research and promotion for Indiana soybean.
And as we kind of look at this problem, you wouldn't necessarily think it would be a problem, but it kind of has been brought up here in the past couple of years. I won't make you comment on it, but there has been an Indiana representative out in Washington that has been advocating against the checkoff. And that's what makes this somewhat prevalent, is that there are some representatives, some senators out in D.C. that would like to see this go away. So having this in place, it really aligns us with some other states around the country to make sure that this is in place.
That's correct. Yeah, Indiana is the only major soybean producing state that doesn't have some sort of fallback state language that would allow a plant of continued business for their state qualified soybean program. So we just want to make sure that Indiana soybean growers would be on a level playing field with their compatriots on the other side of the state lines.
David, if SB 55 didn't go through and some of those folks out in D.C. got their way and the federal checkoff did go away, what types of things would Indiana soybean growers be missing out on? What types of opportunities would no longer be there?
Unfortunately, Eric, it's probably more than I can count and relate to you in this short interview. But Indiana Soybean has been doing a lot of work with researchers up at Purdue University to find new genes that would protect our plants from things like soybean cyst nematode and other soybean diseases. Indiana Soybean Alliance has been doing a lot of work to create new value products from soybeans and do market development work all around the world. Those things would unfortunately come to a stop, and we would be back to where we are just producing a commodity product without a lot of value-added end uses.
One thing I know that would go away, and it would be really unfortunate, one of the best events of the year for me, and that is that new uses competition at Purdue University, where these students, whether they're in agriculture or not, come together and create these new products for soybeans. Last year, I know it wasn't the winner, but one that stuck out at me, they're trying to make golf balls and pickleballs and all sorts of sports balls out of soybeans. It's like the ingenuity of these kids, that goes away if this goes away.
You're absolutely right, Eric. The amount of creativity and energy that we see out of that competition at Purdue is mind-boggling. We've been very fortunate to see some products that come out of those that make it to commercialization. And while demand increases may start out small, they can definitely grow over time.
David, speak to this from the pork side too. You're a pig farmer also. They've tagged on to this bill as well. This is for the pork checkoff also. You guys are kind of teaming together on this. It's important to that side as well.
Very much so. The pork checkoff has been, I would say, a very key piece in trying to improve both domestic and international demand for U.S. and Indiana pork. And the nice thing about the pork checkoff program is it really works to educate producers about how they can produce a healthier, safer, better food product for the consumer.
And they've done a lot in the way of consumer education as well, and really just the different marketing campaigns for the different ways that pork can be consumed. A new marketing campaign that just came out this past year. It's a lot of good work being done on the pork side also.
Definitely. With the new dietary guidelines that have recently come out from USDA, highlighting the importance of good lean protein, pork, and the advertising campaign that the National Pork Board has done is very well placed to take advantage of that.
David, what's the call to action for soybean growers, for pork producers around the state to make sure that SB 55 gets through? It's over to the House now, right?
That's right. We've seen legislation in both the House and the Senate side, but the Senate is a little bit further along. I would just make sure you let your senators and state representatives know that you support having this fallback language in code, but don't be bashful about also telling them we need to do things to promote biofuels and other things like that here in the state to create more demand.
David Harden, thanks for joining us on the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast. We appreciate your time. I'll let you go back and eat some bacon.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate that.
And we'll have more farmers coming up here on the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast. We're here at the State House. It's busy back here at the Bacon Bar and Brunch.
At Indiana Farm Bureau, we serve tree farmers, goat farmers, and in fact, all farmers. With over 250,000 members, Indiana Farm Bureau represents a broad range of farmers and puts power in your collective voice. You also get advice from our subject matter experts, more affordable health plan options, and support for youth programs statewide. So whether you grow soybeans or strawberries, membership means you'll be heard. Become a member today at infb.org.
Welcome back to the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast. We're at the State House. I'm with Alan Dunn with the Indiana Corn Growers Association. And Alan, in Clinton County, got a lot of corn there, and we've got a lot of legislation here at the State House. Not a ton of it surrounding corn this year, but we've had some priorities both at the state level, the federal level over the past several years. We're struggling to get some of this through, and some of it is common sense stuff, in my opinion. Let's talk E15. Man, this just seems like it's too easy, and we can't figure this out. It seems like it's a Republican's dream to help farmers, and it seems like it's a Democrat's dream of wanting to lower emissions and be on the environmental side. What am I missing here?
Well, you lay it out perfectly. I think the answer is politics, right? It's that neither side wants to let the other side get credit for a victory. And it's been very frustrating, and we're once again, we made it to the 11th hour in December of 2024. We thought we had E15 across the finish line. We're right there again. I'm checking my phone right before we talked to see if there was any new breakthrough developments. I did not see any, but we're still hopeful that before the end of January here that we can get that across the finish line in Washington. So I think the corn grower focus right now is really in Washington, unless, at the state level.
We have had some legislation in the past. Last year, a bill introduced here at the State House trying to provide some incentives for some of our fuel retailers to, I guess, feel some confidence in being able to put some more, E15 and E85 pumps out there. And again, getting E15 year-round would be a great bit of confidence to get some of those. Right now, it's still a little difficult unless you're looking for it to even find those pumps around.
Yeah, and that's going to be a real focus, I think, coming around to the 2027 legislative session. What you're referring to is we had a biofuel tax credit bill last year that was not successful, primarily because of the large reduction in the revenue forecast for the state, and they kind of pulled back on any new programming. But what that bill would do would be to provide those retailers a tax credit for installing the pump equipment that would allow for additional additional gallons of E15 and E85 to be sold in Indiana. So yeah, that's a really big deal. We can have legislation authorizing it, but if there's no pumps, it doesn't do any good for either the consumer who gets that lower cost fuel or the grower who would benefit from more corn being turned into ethanol.
So at this point, for the Indiana corn growers, it's a lot about supporting your friends here at the State House, the soybean growers and the livestock growers too.
Yeah, we tend to call that Ag Coalition the barnyard. So here we're today. It's a celebration of agriculture, a celebration of the barnyard. Our friends, the largest company, we talk a lot about ethanol, but we forget that our biggest customer is livestock, cattle and hogs, poultry. So today is a little bit of a celebration of our partnership with them and what all of those things that make Indiana the great state that it is.
Alan, I want you to change hats here a little bit, okay? You're no longer with the Indiana Corn Growers Association, all right? We're going to switch this a little bit. You also serve as county councilman there in Clinton County.
Correct.
And we've talked a lot. Last year, we spent a lot of time breaking down SB 1, now Senate Enrolled Act 1, the tax policy. And a lot of the talk is, what is this going to do to local communities? I guess we can officially call this now the Braun tax reform bill. It was meant to drive taxes down for Hoosiers. We're still trying to figure out if that's going to be the ultimate goal for all Hoosiers, farmers in particular. Kind of, from what we understand, it depends. But what is it going to do to counties? What's it going to do to cities, municipalities? From where you sit as a county councilman, what does that look like?
Well, I would equate it like this. The human body is a very complex thing that when you take one medication, you can have side effects, right? You can have unintended consequences or impacts on other systems. The body politic is exactly the same way. And what I think we're finding as local governments have been able to do some research studies, fiscal impact studies, is that there are unintended consequences here that I don't think this is strictly going to be a reduction in a tax bill for everybody. I do think there's going to be winners and losers, and I think communities are going to have really tough choices when they come to the realization that revenue is going to be lower than before. The community will have to have a discussion. Do we want to replace that revenue with a tax increase on another subset of the population, or are we okay with reduced services? Are you okay with calling 911 and getting a please hold? Are you okay with calling for an ambulance and it being 30 minutes instead of 7 minutes? We're going to have some really tough decisions. Professor DeBoer from Purdue has come out with a lot of really good numbers that show if you have a home value below roughly $100,000, you can see a tax increase when this system is all implemented. And yet county and city governments could still have less revenue to operate on. So, do we raise income taxes on those same individuals that now have a higher property tax bill? There's a lot of unintended consequences, I think. I hope that in 2027 we revisit the bill and maybe we look at some of that new information that we know now that we didn't know last year, and we try to fix some of those consequences. I hope we can do better.
I know that there are some bills out there in this session that I don't know what will happen with them. Governor Braun on record saying probably nothing until we open the budget back up in 27. Alan, thank you for your perspective as a county councilman. We appreciate you joining us here as the Indiana corn guy. Again, not much going on here at the State House for Indiana corn, but enough that we gotta help protect our friends, right?
Well, that's right, and it's time to build relationship and get to know people and let them get to know us. And so it's days like this they serve a real purpose.
Alan Dunn with the Indiana Corn Growers Association here at the State House Bacon Bar and Brunch. We've got more on the way here on the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast.
The average American reaches for their mobile phone about 350 times a day. For Indiana farmers, that number is probably higher, as the Hoosier Ag Today mobile app keeps them updated on the latest markets, weather, and farm news information. If you haven't downloaded this free app, you're missing out on a powerful and portable resource. The Hoosier Ag Today mobile app can be downloaded at the Apple Store and Google Play, and at HoosierAgToday.com. The Hoosier Ag Today mobile app.
We're back at the Bacon Bar and Brunch on the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast, and I'm here with Josh Trineri. He's with Indiana Pork. And Josh, we first off, the bacon fantastic.
Yeah.
Good stuff here. I particularly like the candied bacon.
Yeah, I agree. This is a good one for us to sponsor. Soybean and corn always get a good turnout, and it's great to participate in, and they're serving our product, so you can't beat it.
Can't beat it at all. I mean, it's just fantastic stuff. I tried all of them, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Candy stuff is the best. So, Josh, let's talk about some legislation that is happening here at the State House that is impacting pork producers. I did a story on this with you a couple of weeks ago now.
Yeah.
Ultra-processed foods. And this has been a story that has been really kind of across the country at this point. It's happening at the federal level. Now it's impacting us at the state level. Of what is the definition of ultra-processed foods? Where does pork fit into this? And now we have House Bill 1137 that is moving on to the Senate, and we're still trying to find this definition, and that's what's concerning, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely in vogue at the federal level and in several different states to try to figure out what the definition of ultra-processed food should be in order to make it a regulatory category. And the problem with the approach that we've seen in a lot of cases is it'll use a overly simplistic risk analysis to determine what to regulate. And that would be the case with the bill 1137 in Indiana that's passed out of the House. It has a static list of additives that it wants to put in statute, and then that would be what you would base regulation on. For instance, in 1137, if any of those additives on that list were used, it would ban those foods out of school cafeterias. And the problem with that is it's viewing risk the same way like California or the European Union would view risk, which is the idea that if there's a risk factor that pops up in a study where large amounts of the substance have been fed to a lab rat or something and it caused an issue, then yeah, there's a potential for risk there. But what more evolved risk analysis does is make sure that when you notice that risk, then does that translate into real world conditions and become an actual human risk? And that's where this overly simplistic view of how to do things, like from the EU and what Indiana's trying to do here, is wrong. Because if it's not going to cause health problems in a human in real world conditions, then it shouldn't be regulated in that way.
And it doesn't seem like that's the way we've really ever done things here in Indiana.
Yeah.
You're talking about California and the EU that have just completely different, let's call it what it is, different belief systems than what we hold here in Indiana and is what traditionally been held here at the State House.
Yeah, you can consider this version of ultra-processed food definitions as it pops up state by state. You can consider that a gradual shift in how the U.S. is evaluating risk. And that's something we want to stop, and we don't want Indiana to be a part of. You also have to take into account the type of food that's being regulated, because if you need some further processing of a product to make it more shelf stable or to enhance its nutrient availability, or even just something as simple as keeping the fat from going rancid, that's a perfectly reasonable purpose for a food additive to be used in processing. For example, one of the things on the list in 1137 is BHT, and that's a product that the pork industry uses to help eat from things like sausage and hams to help fat from going rancid. And it is one of those things where in European research they've seen a health issue in a rat. It's clear that it does not translate into becoming a human safety issue. In fact, there's still a codex for it on the international scale. It's still out there being used. Why would Indiana regulate that?
It just, what types of foods, by the way, would be banned from schools that pork producers produce with this, under this bill?
Yeah, it would depend on the type of processing, but the thing we would be most concerned about based on that list, and you'd have to talk to other trade organizations to see what else would be affected, but based on how they're processed and preserved, we'd be worried about just that, like things like ham, bacon, and sausage, where maybe BHT was a component in their processing, and that's a whole nutrient-dense food that's getting a protein source to those kids, and the reason it's being processed is to enhance that shelf stability to make sure it gets there.
And Other things would be more expensive for the schools, more expensive. Like, this just doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. For school systems that are having trouble making ends meet anyway, and then we're going to layer this on top of that. Yeah, so we don't want Indiana to start down this path. You'll see an aggressive push from the ag organizations on the Senate side. And now that we've spent some time with the bill, and there'll be an aggressive push to try to get rid of this thing on the Senate side. It's just bad policy for Indiana.
And what is the call to action for growers, whether it be pork producers, corn growers, soybean growers? Because again, we talk about this. Pork producers are the number one customer for corn and soybean producers.
Sure. Yeah. So we're in a little bit of a lull here because the next steps depend on which committee it goes to in the Senate. It's already passed out of the House. So we're preparing materials and kind of preparing the game plan for how we're going to educate that committee, as it's sort of a coalition of ag groups. And that will involve some producer involvement in the form of, constituents in the districts where those Senate members on that committee live. But until we know the committee, we're not hitting the ground running until we know who we're focusing on for the educational part of this ahead of that hearing. So.
Well, we'll certainly help with that process once we know where that committee is. So, Josh, while we have that bill that's coming through that maybe isn't the best news for pork producers, we do have another bill that's moving through that is actually quite good news for pork producers. This seems like one of those bills that's, symbolic and maybe doesn't do much if you really, don't pay that close of attention. But I liken it to when we made the state snack popcorn, and I think it just brings awareness to the product, and that is we're looking to make the state sandwich the pork tenderloin. And I think that ultimately this bill just does raise the awareness to what is probably the most popular thing that folks come to Indiana to eat, and that is the pork tenderloin.
Yeah, and we got to thank Senator Zay for this one because he came to us because he's got a restaurant in his district that supposedly is one of the oldest, purveyors of tenderloin in the state, and so he's excited about that, and so are we. And he's trying to move this at the state level. So in an environment where a lot of these hearings are a slog, talk about the tenderloin for a while, it's kind of fun.
Well, I go on social media, and I don't belong to any of these groups. They just pop up on my feed.
Sure.
And I go along, and seriously, they're looking for like the biggest pork tenderloin in Indiana, and there's like, I don't know if they're like putting them on tiny buns or if they're all the same size buns, but they're trying to see like how big the pork tenderloin is in comparison to the bun. Like that it's like a competition.
Yeah.
So I think this is a great bill. It's more than symbolic. I think this is a great thing for pork producers.
Yeah, we're not sure where it'll ultimately end up, but it'll be a fun ride while it's going here. So.
Josh, what else do we have here at the State House that is impacting pork producers or those in the livestock industry?
Yeah, so I'd say on the regulatory front, there's a executive order by the governor to codify rules into statute that have been stagnant for a certain period of time. One of those is the state chemist's fertilizer use rule. So as they move their fertilizer use rule into statute, we're using that as an opportunity to amend it to shore up some regulatory authority that we had always intended for the state chemist to have. It just wasn't drafted in quite the right way years ago when we made the first run at it. And that's to make sure that on unregulated farms that aren't regulated by IDEM, that the state chemist's office would have the same authority as they have over staged manure out on a farm field for stockpiled manure at those production sites, which they now don't currently have. And that causes a lot of frustration in counties because they don't know who to call if they see an issue on those sites. It causes reputational issues in our industry where the bulk of my members are heavily regulated, but if you have a few bad apples out there that aren't storing their manure right, we need a regulatory hook there. And we're trying to address that in the state chemist bill, and Representative Baird's helping us with that, and we've been pretty excited about that. Also seeing some things in IDEM. The IDEM agency bill this year is addressing some things we've been trying to fix with biomass digesters in Indiana, and they've been very helpful on that, and we think that policy's on a good path now. It'll require some rule changes once their bill gets adopted. And then another thing we'd like to see is a limitation on the type of analysis that IDEM engineers can do on our permit applications when they're submitted by a licensed professional engineer. The engineer at IDEM's job is to make sure that it's compliant with the law and compliant with the rule. What we find is too many times it devolves into that specific engineer's preferences as to how they'd like to see a calculation done, or a little nuance and approach to a design that they'd like to see, where there are multiple other avenues that a professional engineer could take to make it compliant. And we need to back that off because it's causing considerable delays in our permit issuance at the agency. And as there's more and more interest in construction and looking around to build, we need to get that shored up so that the engineers are staying in their lane. They're making sure we're compliant with the law, but they're not overstepping their bounds. And we hope to do that this session.
I would imagine potentially additional costs too in some cases.
Absolutely. We had an environmental consultant testify in committee on this bill yesterday. One of the examples she gave was a different compliance approach than the one that the engineer that was working for the applicant proposed, but it had a $45,000 price tag on it. But if the engineer at IDEM has their feet set and won't budge off of it, the producer's only recourse at that point is to just roll over. Basically, you have to let your permit be issued, and then you have to go back and administratively appeal your own permit, which is ridiculous. So we got to try to stop this type of overreach on the front end, and we think Representative Culp's bill will help do that. So.
Josh Trineri, Indiana Pork, a lot happening here at the State House for pork producers. Make sure you get involved and reach out to Indiana Pork and see how you can help. Josh, thanks for joining us on the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks.
More to come here from Bacon Bar and Brunch at the State House on the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast in just moments.
There is strength in numbers. That's why the Indiana Soybean Alliance membership and policy and Indiana Corn Growers Association need you. These organizations represent Indiana soybean and corn farmers on critical and regulatory issues affecting their industry. Along with support from the national organizations, National Corn Growers Association and American Soybean Association, the Indiana members help determine public policy positions on critical issues, including farm bills, trade policy, and ethanol and biodiesel legislation. Become a member of Indiana Soybean Alliance membership, Indiana Corn Growers Association, or both. Visit incornandsoy.org to select a membership. That's incornandsoy.org.
And we are back on the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast from the Indiana State House, the Bacon Bar and Brunch. You can see all the activity happening behind us. I'm with Denise Scarborough now. She is with the American Soybean Association. And Denise, a lot of the policy you deal with is at the federal level, and there's a lot happening at the federal level right now. Let's start by talking about this bridge payment. It was announced, USDA told us back in December, we're going to let you know all the numbers so you can take it to your banker. We're going to let you know that before the end of the year. And they snuck that in like 3:30 on December 31st. They got you the numbers, right? The numbers, they are what they are, but were they a little disappointing when they came out?
They definitely were disappointing on the soybean side. We've had some of the hardest hit to soybean products with the tariffs and with China and what we've had going on over there and trying to ship product internationally. So we were very disappointed in how that price came out for soybeans. It was some of the lowest prices that were on that sheet for commodities. The American Soybean Association is working and trying to gain some better pricing on that. But it's just like anything else. Trying to get that done is really hard.
And I can say I've heard from some corn growers, they're not real pleased with what happened, especially after last Monday's USDA report. From what I understand, they got like $44 per acre. And that USDA report after the losses they had, it was like a loss of $45 per acre from just that one day in losses. So really for corn and soybean growers, just not a very good day, not a very good solution. It is meant to just bridge folks to the next year. I mean, I guess the question comes in, how much more do you need from folks that don't farm? That's what they want to know. How much more do you really need? It's probably kind of hard to really say at this point, is it?
It's really hard to put an actual number on there. I mean, our input costs are constantly on the rise. I mean, we have no control over that. We're one of the only industries that buys retail and sells wholesale. So we just don't have any control over those pricing for inputs and then what we're selling our grain for. I mean, anything that we go to is we don't want the aid. We really just want some free trade. We want to be able to have the opportunity to sell our commodities on the open market.
As we look at some other things that are happening out in D.C., I know one thing that's kind of been hanging over the soybean folks has been this MAHA thing, the Make America Healthy Again. And we did an Indiana Ag Policy podcast on this months ago, and they've really been hammering on soybean oil. Now that things have been released, how did things come out for soybean growers? Was it as bad as we thought initially that it might be?
So it actually came out more favorable than what we were anticipating for soybean growers. It wasn't as beneficial for soy oil, but the rest of the soybean products that were in there and what we have in the food industry came out very favorable for what we have. So we were happy with that. We've had a lot of challenges with MAHA since it came out. Overall, just talking science-based versus talking emotional-based of the things that have been put in MAHA. So we're going to continue to work with people out in D.C. and try to continue to prove that soybeans are heart healthy. They're a good option to have in the food industry.
We keep talking about high oleic soybeans everywhere. It's one of the big things that came from the checkoff, and now that the policy side is trying to protect and make sure, it is heart healthy. It is one of these things that is just a good thing, especially here in Indiana where we have a lot of high oleic growers.
I mean, we're really blessed. Indiana is the #1 grower of high oleic soybean oil, and the way that we have gotten it and promoted it throughout Indiana, so it's at a lot of the stadiums throughout Indiana. So like Lucas Oil has it, the Indians Stadium here in town, and it's just great, and it's exciting to be a producer and to be able to go to those venues and you see that there's signage up from Indiana Soybean and promoting the high oleic soybean oil and it being a heart-healthy product.
As a member of the American Soybean Association, what other priorities are there right now? What else are you looking at?
I mean, we always have the priorities of, we need a farm bill. We need things to go through that. Throughout Indiana, we're just really trying to support the other checkoffs we've got going on right now. And continue to find ways to domestically and internationally help move our soy and corn products.
Denise, thank you for joining us. Always a pleasure to see you.
Thanks, Eric.
That does it for this edition of the Indiana Ag Policy Podcast from the State House. I want to thank the Indiana Corn Growers Association and the Indiana Soybean Alliance for playing host today for us at the State House and for sponsoring this podcast. And also I want to thank Indiana Farm Bureau for their support of this podcast as well. I'm Eric Pfeiffer for Hoosier Ag Today, Indiana's Farm Network.